Thank you, Chair. And may I thank the Speaker for granting this debate this morning. And may I thank you formally, Chair, in advance for your chairmanship of this debate. I beg to move that this House has considered job losses in the UK automotive industry. Precipitous is not a word used very often, but when it is spoken by the chief executive of a major global automotive manufacturer, then it is really time to listen. Why? Because such utterances are rare from major industrialists who prefer to keep out of the headlines and to get on with the day-to-day of running multi-billion organizations employing hundreds of thousands of people. It is true that here in the UK, the automotive industry has been one of the great success stories since the financial crash of 2007-8. In the 2 decades before that crisis, the industry's economic output was broadly flat before dropping sharply in 2009. Since then, we have been fortunate to witness a renaissance in a major industry which was seriously damaged by the crash, but which managed to sustain itself with some government intervention through that difficult period. In 2017, in real terms, the motor manufacturing industry was worth 25% more than in 2007, although growth appears to have leveled off in the last year. In 2007, the manufacturing of motor vehicles accounted for 5.4% of UK manufacturing total, but in 2017, it accounted for 8.1%, a 50% increase in its overall importance. This has been the result of significant inward investment from all the resident vehicle manufacturers and component suppliers, and has contributed to almost 10 consecutive years of steady growth. And just as importantly, this in turn has translated into a 29% increase in direct manufacturing employment to the sector. But the headwinds are strong and many. As the industry meets the challenges of transitioning to cleaner fuels and to a super low carbon future, it is being disrupted by the uncertainty of Brexit and a government policy that is penalising the cleaner diesel-powered vehicles. It is currently one of the great paradoxes in business that in seeking to improve air quality, the government has actually managed to reverse the progress achieved over many years in reducing carbon dioxide emissions. In my maiden speech last year, I stated that there were rising pressures on the industry and that action was needed to maintain its recent success. I warned of the slowdown with sales falling and the economic bellwether the industry represents. It has become increasingly clear that from trucks to cars, we are seeing falling sales as people decide not to replace their vehicles. I have repeated these calls in many subsequent debates, and there have been many in recent months, including the recent one held by my honourable friend for Dagenham, MP for Dagenham and Rainham, and by my honourable friend, the member for Ellesmere Port. Both have reflected the rising concern of the real threats to the sector and sought the attention of the government to act to address the real, clear and present danger to the sector. This has become so real since the autumn, with the announcement of job losses all over the UK. To date, 2,000 jobs have been lost among the car manufacturers themselves, while other planned increases in staff recruitment have been put on hold. But more widely, when the component suppliers and related sectors are taken into account, it is estimated that between 8,000 and 12,000 jobs at least have been lost, and that is in just 8 months. Of course I will quit.
Thank you, Mr. Bonan. I thank my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate him in getting this crucial debate. Given the numbers that he's just mentioned, does he think we ought to return to precisely the debate that we had last time we were all sat in this chamber on business rates? The car industry needs a shot in the arm. Isn't it time that the government gave them one?
I thank my honourable friend for an important intervention, and I would totally agree that the situation with business rates is really handicapping the industry in this country and puts it at a significant disadvantage to that of competitors on the continent. And I would add to that also the energy costs that they also face, where on average they are seeing a 74% premium over the energy costs on the continent. So it has become very relevant that in speaking with major manufacturers to me, that their greatest concern is that there seems to be little concern from this government. And perhaps it is disheartening that this apparent disinterest flies in the face of the industry's importance to our overall economy. Whilst the financial services sector is held up as the great driver of the UK national wealth, it is worth remembering the increasingly important contribution of the UK motor vehicle manufacturing industry, which, according to the House of Commons Library, generated £15.2 billion worth of value to the economy in 2017, and that's 0.8% of total output, but more relevantly, 8% of manufacturing output. Likewise, the industry employed 162,000 people across the UK in 2016, equating to 1% of all UK employees. And the automotive industry is the second most investment-intensive sector, total investment as a proportion of gross value added, in UK manufacturing, although it's the top in terms of value terms, investing £3.6 billion in 2015. And in the West Midlands, there are the largest number of people employed in the manufacture of vehicles of any UK region or country, and perhaps that's why it is so close to my heart. At 54,000 employees in our region, it represents around a third of all motor industry employees in the UK. Indeed, I will.
My honourable friend for giving way, and it's actually a timely debate, this. Not only do you have the direct employees, but for every direct employee you have roughly 2, maybe 3 indirect employees. In other words, we're talking about the supply chain here. So it can have a massive effect if this is not handled properly. And I think what we need is a transitional period with electrification on the one hand and the issues about diesel on the other hand. In fact, my old friend from Birmingham and I met the trade unions some months ago on this issue, and there's a lot of concern that this could affect jobs. And business rates, again, the government shifting the expenditure away from what it should be properly funded for the taxpayer base onto local government. And that again creates a major problem, A, for local government, B, for the efficiency of those industries.
I thank my honourable friend for his important contribution, and he's quite right. And in terms of the multiplier effect to supplier industries, to component manufacturers, and so on. And I totally agree with him about the importance of establishing a very clear pathway for transition between where we are today and where we have set ourselves to be in the future. And perhaps it is something that I will come on to speak about at some length. But as I say, these employment statistics are significant by anyone's measure. The concern voiced by the industry is that it needs direction from policymakers, in particular with regard to Brexit and the UK's future trading relationships, as well as support in the transition to cleaner fuels, as I was just saying. Without this clarity, it is inevitable that investment decisions will be placed on hold. And I know people will cite recent announcements, say at Luton and elsewhere, as great news about the future of the industry. But those of us, and many of us will understand, these sorts of decisions are taken many years in advance. They were taken way before the EU referendum. Without this clarity, we will see a freeze on recruitment or job losses, as we've seen. And one example of the freeze on recruitment is in my honourable friend, the member for Dagenham and Rainham's constituency at Dagenham, where they have recently announced that they're going to have to put on hold 150 jobs that they were planning to hire. Just over a year ago, Lloyds Bank conducted a survey of the UK automotive manufacturing sector. It was in March 2017. And they summarised that the vast majority, some 87% of automotive manufacturers, plan to create new jobs over the next 2 years. If their plans were to be replicated across all the UK's automotive firms, they estimated that a further 85,000 new jobs would be introduced. What a difference a year makes. In the context of Brexit, there have been concerns that over the long term there could be job losses in the industry. The Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Committee conducted an inquiry into the impact of Brexit on the industry, and they stated that should the UK leave the customs union and single market, hundreds of thousands of jobs could be lost in the industry. They reported, it is difficult to see how it would make economic sense for multinational volume manufacturers, the bulk of the UK automotive sector, to base production in the UK in a no-deal or World Trade Organization tariff scenario. The shift of manufacturing to countries within the customs union and single market would be inevitable. The cost in UK jobs could be in the hundreds of thousands and inward investment in the hundreds of millions. For the automotive sector, no deal would undoubtedly be hugely damaging. The government should not seriously contemplate this outcome. As the chief executive of the Peugeot Citroën PSA Group, Carlos Tavares, said, and I quote, "We cannot invest in a world of uncertainty. No one is going to make huge investments without knowing what will be the final competitiveness of the Brexit outcome." And this sentiment was echoed by others, including the chief executive of Jaguar Land Rover, Dr. Ralph Speth, who said, "Uncertainty is really challenging us very much, and not only us, it's for the complete industry." You hardly see any inward investment anymore. Perhaps this should come as no surprise. Some have been explaining that job losses in manufacturing are an inevitability and that we should be embracing the loss of manufacturing in a post-Brexit era. One such voice is that of Professor Minford of Cardiff Business School, who has previously advocated running down the UK auto industry. In giving evidence to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in 2012, he said, "It is perfectly true that if you remove protection of the sort that has been given particularly to the car industry and other manufacturing industries inside the protective wall, you will have a change in the situation facing that industry, and you are going to have it run it down. It will be in your interest to do it," he said, "just as in the same way we ran down the coal and steel industries. These things happen. It's evolution. It takes place in your economy." He went on to echo this statement in the Sun newspaper ahead of the EU referendum, writing, "Over time, if we left the EU, it seems likely that we would mostly eliminate manufacturing, leaving mainly industries such as design, marketing and high tech. But this shouldn't scare us." Well, I'm afraid it scares me, and I think it will scare many of us in this room, and for good reason. A while back, the Bayer Select Committee inquiry stated, "It is difficult to see how it would make economic sense for multinational volume manufacturers, the bulk of the UK automotive sector, to base production in the UK. The shift of manufacturing to countries within the customs union and single market would be inevitable, and it would cost hundreds of thousands of jobs," as I just said. Elsewhere, the committee concluded, "Overall, no one has argued that there are advantages to be gained from Brexit for the automotive industry for the foreseeable future, and we urge the government to acknowledge this and to pursue an exercise in damage limitation in the negotiations. This involves retaining as close as possible a relationship with the existing EU regulatory and trading framework in order to give us the volume car manufacturing a realistic chance of surviving in this country." And they are not alone in voicing their fears. The automotive industry's trade body, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, the SMMT, stated, "There is no escaping the fact that being out of the customs union and single market will inevitably add barriers to trade, increase red tape and cost. Settling for good access to each other's markets is not enough, as it will only damage the UK's competitiveness and reduce our ability to attract inward investment and the high-quality jobs that go with it." It's worth just noting that in 2017, 86% of the UK's imports came from the EU, whilst only 41% of UK's export went to the EU. Many will say that the UK runs a widening trade surplus in motor vehicles with non-EU countries, and that a widening trade deficit with EU countries, and therefore leaving the EU and the customs union, is a positive thing. It is true. But that deficit that the industry sees has been responded to by the industry, and its strength through this renaissance has reduced that deficit considerably. And the important thing is that it shows a determination to grow in other markets, to retain its strong position in Europe, but to build elsewhere. And that is what other countries' manufacturers, domestic manufacturers, are doing. And that is what we can do. It is not one or the other. It is a complement. I would argue that remaining in a customs union is critical to the sector's future. What must be avoided at all costs is tariff-free access, or losing tariff-free access to the EU. The worst-case scenario would see the introduction under World Trade Organization rules of a 10% tariff on finished vehicles and a 2.5 to 4.5% tariff on components. These tariff rates would cost the automotive sector at least £2.7 billion on imports and £1.8 billion on exports. Just imagine what will happen to the sticker price of vehicles in this country. Ford has stated that the rules of origin would add a significant cost to their business if UK manufactured products are no longer considered as EU originated. Similarly, Vauxhall stated that any rules of origin changes will have a drastic impact on UK trade with any countries outside the EU. And it is also critical that a future UK-EU trade deal includes provision for full bilateral cumulation, which would ensure that components produced in the EU are considered as local UK content for the purposes of rules of origin. This will ensure that the automotive sector is able to benefit from future preferential trading relationships established with not only the EU but third countries as well. It is worth noting that in the case of Ford's Bridgend output, the majority of it is to the EU. Without a comprehensive UK-EU free trade agreement, the engines sent to the European assembly plants would attract a 4.5% tariff, increasing costs to the consumer. In a sector, in an industry where margins are wafer thin, that sort of tariff will bring about potentially significant damage to the sector. And the SMMT are clear in their position. They state, should the UK and the EU no longer have a customs union, UK businesses exporting to the EU 27 countries would need to submit information about the origin of the product, the destination country, relevant commodity codes, customs procedure codes, product value, a unique consignment number, as well as relevant safety and security information. This would represent a significant increase in bureaucracy and undermine the competitiveness of British business. Compliance with these new requirements would be particularly challenging for SMEs that make up over 90% of the automotive supply chain. And of course, the components industry and the highly integrated supply chain are so crucial to this whole debate. Currently, every week, an estimated 1,100 trucks from the European Union come and deliver components worth £35 million to the UK car and engine plants. Sorry, that is every day. Every day, 1,100 trucks. The movement of those vehicles is so crucial, the timeliness of those vehicles, their departure and their arrival. Every minute counts. But in that supply chain, we have something like 78,000 people employed here in the UK, supplying not just the UK, but across to Europe as well. As a sector, it is highly integrated with the rest of Europe, both in finished cars, but also component parts. For instance, the UK imported just under £14 billion worth of vehicle engines and other components in 2017, and a total of 79% came from the EU. Some may suggest, well, why can't we transfer more of that back to the UK? The complication with all this is about scale and about the strength of businesses and where they need to be located and the geography of supply. The manufacturers' trade body and the automotive trade body, the SMMT, have both called on the government to protect this close integration. And the financial reality of how fragile this chain is underlined by the fact that some manufacturers will face costs of up to £1 million per hour if production is stopped due to a delay in the supply of components to the side of the assembly line. And the SMMT estimates that just a 15-minute delay to parts delivered just in time can cost manufacturers just under £1 million per year. Let me just give two examples. Firstly, of that in the components industry of Delphi fuel injectors. One example is a single injector, which takes over 35 components. In the manufacturing, it requires 100 process steps. And the elements that come together to make that single injector come from 15 countries. The injector itself goes through 39 UK, EU border crossings and 5 UK Customs Union border crossings. Another example would be the mini crankshaft. It crosses the channel 3 times in a 2,000-mile journey before the finished car rolls off the production line. The casting is made in France. It is then transferred to Hams Hall, here back in the Midlands, where it is crafted into shape. Those pieces are then sent to Munich and inserted into an engine. And that engine is then sent to Mini's plant in Oxford, where it will be installed into the car. And then related to all this is the importance of type approvals, an area which is much overlooked, but can add significant cost. One such engine supplier, who I won't mention the name, has estimated it will cost between 300,000 and 500,000 per vehicle certification if we do not have harmonization with Europe. In fact, the CBI noted that the two areas where they argued that the greatest convergence with the EU was so important was on the rules that determine how and by whom vehicles can be approved as safe for the road, and that the Vehicle Certification Agency must maintain its ability to approve vehicles for the European market. And its second point was about maintaining the pan-European rules on carbon dioxide and other air pollutants to ensure that international targets on clean air and climate change are met. Which takes me on to diesel. In the early 2000s, the drive to achieve climate change goals led to the rapid uptake of diesel, and 17% of total car market as it was then grew to 50% in just 8 years. The manufacturers responded. Ford set up its Dagenham Diesel Centre, which employs, I think, 3,000 staff, and it provides for 50% of all Ford's global diesel production. 50%. Then came the Volkswagen Dieselgate scandal, and subsequently the demonization of diesel, which has led to a 33% drop in diesel sales so far this year. Once more, manufacturers have sought to respond where they have seen a lack of leadership, perhaps from policymakers. Ford introduced a diesel scrappage scheme, as certain other manufacturers have done. And since September, they have taken 21,000 vehicles off the road. The program has been so successful that they extended it beyond December, when it was due to close, and is still currently running. A tax on diesel was then announced in November, in the 2017 November budget, where there was an increase in the vehicle excise duty by 1 band and on benefit in kind by an additional 1% for all diesel vehicles. Some would say that's kicking an industry when it is already struggling. The taxing vehicles on this legislative standard is yet to be finalised or introduced by the EU and is unprecedented and unrealistic. The measure, I would suggest, is counterproductive and merely makes worse the problem it seeks to solve. More people will hold off and are holding off buying new diesel vehicles and remain in using older polluting vehicles, as we are now seeing. And of course, in the reduction or the lack of support for the diesel industry, it doesn't take into account the many hundreds of millions of pounds that the industry has already invested into their manufacture, responding to the government and policy direction of say 5-10 years ago. Diesel today is the cleanest yet, and it has the same nitrous oxide and particulate emissions as petrol, with 20% lower CO2 emissions. To put that into context, If you compare today's new diesel cars with those put out on the road just 2 years ago, in 2016, it would take at least 6 of today's cars to emit the same nitrous oxides as just one of the older vehicles. So the focus should be on getting the older vehicles off the road, not on penalising the customers who wish to buy newer, cleaner diesels. And of course, that swing to petrol means a collective failure to meet our carbon dioxide targets. And you will know that we are now seeing an uptick in carbon dioxide emissions for the first time after 15 years. So, Chair, if I may sum up, we are seeing very challenging issues in our deliberations over Brexit and the trading arrangements we face. It is, I believe, best exemplified by the situation and the profound challenges faced by one of our most successful industries, the automotive industry. The industry has seen a renaissance which was seriously damaged by the global financial crash, but it managed to sustain itself. And since then, we have seen a huge inward investment by various manufacturers, which has contributed to a 50% increase in manufacturing share and almost 10 years of steady growth, and a consequent almost 30% increase in direct manufacturing employment to the sector, notwithstanding the growth in component suppliers. The industry is facing the challenges also of transitioning to cleaner fuels and to a super low carbon future, but this is being disrupted by the uncertainty of Brexit and the government policy that seeks to penalise the cleaner diesel-powered vehicles. It is currently one of the great paradoxes that in seeking to improve air quality, the government has actually managed to reverse the progress achieved over many years of reducing carbon dioxide emissions. As the chief executive of the SMMT, the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, put it, Mike Hawes, he said, "The industry shares government's vision of a low-carbon future and is investing to get us there. But we can't do it overnight, and nor can we do it alone. The anti-diesel agenda has set back progress on climate change, while electric vehicle demand remains disappointingly low amid consumer concerns around charging infrastructure availability and affordability. To accelerate fleet renewal, motorists must have the confidence to invest in the cleanest cars for their needs, however they are powered. A consistent approach to incentives and tax and greater investment in charging infrastructure will be critical. Now more than ever, we need a strategy that allows manufacturers time to invest, innovate and sell competitively, and which gives consumers every incentive to adapt." And that it is, and that is what it is. It's about a controlled, orderly, managed transition from one to the other. That is all the industry seeks. And regarding Brexit, it simply wants both clarity and certainty urgently. Many are calling for the government to act now to reduce the effects of diesel taxation on the newest, cleanest diesel vehicles and to amend the carbon dioxide bans to reduce the impact of new emissions on consumer vehicle excise duty. Failure to do this will threaten the future success and sustainability of businesses and the significant contribution this sector makes to jobs and to the UK economy. The orderly managed transition, as I described, is essential to enable the manufacturers to use their revenues today to invest in our tomorrow. Without that support, the sector could be seriously damaged in its need to compete with the likes of China that have the scale and state backing to invest in the newer technologies. Chair, we have grown used to a successful industry, contributing greatly not just to our international trade, but also to our global manufacturing prestige. We would be fools not to support it. Thank you.